Historians of Reddit, what is the strangest chain of events you have studied? We learnt about this as school. In the 1950s in Borneo they were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so, with the help of the World Health Organization, they sprayed DDT all over the island to kill the mosquitoes. But the DDT also killed the island's wasps, which helped control the population of thatch-eating caterpillars, thatch that people's homes were made of, and thanks to this, their roofs began to collapse. Many other small insects started to get affected by the DDT, which were eaten by geckos. The geckos developed a tolerance to the DDT, but the cats who ate the geckos didn't, and the cat population started to die off. This led to the island's rat population to increase greatly. And that's the story of how an island with a malaria problem led to cats being airdropped into Borneo. President Andrew Jackson was walking out of the Capitol building with his buddy Congressman Davy Crockett. A man approached them, drew a gun, but it misfired. The man drew a second gun, which also misfired. Andrew Jackson, fairly old at this point, lifted his cane and began beating the would-be assassin. Normally, people would react with justice served, but Jackson was beating him so badly that Davy Crockett had to pull Jackson off his would-be assassin, who was arrested shortly after. The would-be assassin stood trial, represented by lawyer Francis Scott Key, author of The Star-Spangled Banner, and was the first American to be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Edit: Crockett was in the House, not the Senate. A Chinese man wanted to create a potion to become immortal. Instead he accidentally created gunpowder. Zhenggu Canal. The Han heard the Qin were fond of mega-projects and massive infrastructure investments, so they found a hydraulics engineer and sent him over to sell them on an absurd canal idea: build a massive canal to use runoff water from two flood-prone rivers to irrigate worthless plains. Tame the river's flooding, irrigate wasteland, everybody wins, and in the Han schemes, it's an absurdly large project that will keep the Qin diverted and invested for decades. And #X200B, and it does. Except about halfway through, the Qin cotton onto this and confront their hydraulics engineer, Zheng Go, presumably confronted with whatever creative things they do to spies and saboteurs, throws himself on Qin mercy. Yeah, I'm a spy, yeah, it was to sabotage your efforts, but I'm really an engineer, guys, and this will really work, honest, let me finish it, and please don't do that thing with the cheese grater. And #X200B, the Qin, presumably, conclude they can always torture him to death later, and let him remain in charge of the project. And #X200B, and wonder of wonders, it works. Thousands of hectares or rich but fallow desert are turned into fertile farmland. Existing farmland is made safer by giving the flooding rivers runoff channels. The canal makes the Qin rich beyond their already immense wealth, which they turn to larger armies, eventually crushing the Han and, briefly, uniting China. This is an older BBC series called Connections, with James Burke hosting, and it is incredibly fascinating. You can watch most of the episodes on YouTube. It's kind of what you're asking about, chains of events throughout history. From the Normans' horse stirrups to mine shafts to vacuums to telecommunications, all connected. I highly recommend anyone give this a try. Pretty much the fall of the Berlin Wall. The USSR was already crumbling by this point, and so they agreed to allow the wall to be open for a bit. Well, the guy in charge over in Berlin didn't really get the point across to the public very well, and as a result everyone assumed that the wall was permanently coming down. This led to pretty much all of East Berlin flocking to the wall and demanding to be let through. The guards there knew there was no way to restrain all these people without a massacre occurring, and the Russian government had no real way of easily fixing the huge mistake. And so the Berlin Wall fell, all because of a misinterpretation. British officers in India in the 18th century were eating quinine powder to help treat malaria. Quinine is so bitter on its own, so they started putting it in their club soda to make easier to down. They invented tonic water. Brought the water back to Europe, and they started putting it in their gin. Hence, gin and tonic. The events that led and culminated in the War of the Bucket for sure. Essentially, one Italian state who followed Holy Roman Emperor stole a bucket from another Italian state who followed the Pope. War broke out, the Papal state highly outnumbered the HRE state, but HRE state won. Then stole another bucket. Was a trip for sure when I learned about this one. In 1918, British MP Noel Pemberton Billing caused a major scandal when he accused actress Maud Allen, and Margot Asquith, wife of the previous Prime Minister, of being at the center of a homosexual ring sabotaging the war effort. Evidence included Allen having performed in a play by Oscar Wilde, and Asquith having attended the performance. He presented his case in an article entitled The Cult of the Clitoris, in which he claimed the exiled Prince of Albania had a black book, listing all the blackmailed homosexuals in Britain. Maud Allen, who was in fact homosexual, Asquith was not sued for libel, but lost. During the trial, one witness claimed to have seen the Albanian prince's black book, and claimed that the judge's name was in it. Horses evolved in North America, spread during prehistorical times into Asia, and then later went extinct in North America. If things had been only slightly different, horses could have been native only to the Americas, or just completely extinct by prehistory. Not having horses would have made a huge difference to Asian and European history. No Mongol invasions, no European knights. The immovable ladder. Guy leaves ladder leaning against wall of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem some time before 1728. A thing called the status quo happens in 1757, which means don't touch garbage on holy sites. Ladder is still there. Recent history, but it still boggles my mind. Jeri Ryan gets cast on Star Trek Voyager as 7 of 9. Jeri Ryan divorces her husband. Her ex-husband, Jack, with a really strong resume and a lot of money, announces a Senate campaign in the state of Illinois in 2004. His entry in the race is enough that it is now considered a toss-up. Because both Jeri and Jack are public figures, journalists push for their divorce records to be released, and a major factor in their split was Jack's desire to have happy fun time in public locations. Jack Ryan drops out and the GOP struggles to find a replacement. This leads to an overwhelming victory from the Democratic challenger, Barack Obama. The entire Obama presidency exists because some writers in the 90s wanted a big titty Borg girl in their show. The white collars from the port case in Peru, that is still ongoing. It has landed former presidents, current political power holders and many public servants to jail. Many congressmen and women are shaking, knowing they will be next, once their parliamentary immunity runs off. Thing is, one day two idiot drug dealers decided to have a shootout in the streets of Callao, which is a port city, embedded inside Lima, the country's capital city. The place is highly contested by drug dealers since the port facilities are the main exit point for large drug shipments. Obviously, this being Peru, everything is corrupt as fluff. So a small, but brave and honest, group of police officers and district attorneys start investigating this shootout and casually obtain wire-tap judge orders for the suspects of the drug-dealing organization. And lo behold, a lot of judges and politicians were in the payroll of these drug dealers. But that was not the funny part. That would be the fact that the wire-tapping orders were expanded, and in the end they ended up finding out the top judges in the country did favors in exchange for ridiculous things. One of them asked for an iPhone for her daughter and tickets to see the national soccer team play. This guy also was asked to let a guy walk free, who had raped a 14-year-old girl, and his response was, "What do you want? Reduced sentence? Go free." He can be heard on the audio discussing, how much rape did the girl get, and speaking of it as if it was nothing. These top judges control which judge gets sent to which court. Obviously, most of our politicians, being real corrupt fluffs, have lots of ongoing court cases. No surprise to find among the recordings, that these top judges negotiated with a lot of politicians to arrange favors. This has caused a chain reaction of people being investigated and jailed, politicians and members of the justice system. It has confirmed what everyone suspected for years, that the justice system in Peru only works if you have money and or known people inside. Also, bonus track, some journalists have been linked to these corruption rings, thanks to these audios. Currently the Congress, which is the most corrupt and useless one in decades, is scrambling to keep the judges accused of corruption from going to prison, while keeping the president from making reforms by obstructing laws. Everyone and their mothers are ducking for cover because they know that the evidence against is mounting so darn fast, that the usual tactics no longer work for these politicians. So, thanks to this and the Odebrecht, Lava Jato case, we might finally find some justice for these corrupt politicians that have been treating us like idiots for the past 30 years. And all because two idiot drug dealers wanted to see who had the biggest slong, by shooting each other. Probably how Pepsi briefly became the 6th largest military in the world. In 1959, President Eisenhower wanted to show the Soviet Union how great America was, so the government set up an American National Exhibition and sent Vice President Nixon there. Well, Nixon and Soviet leader Khrushchev got in an argument over communism versus capitalism. As it got heated, the president of Pepsi stepped in and was like, "Bro Khrushchev, chill out, have a Pepsi." Khrushchev most of loved that garbage, because then the Soviet Union wanted to permanently bring Pepsi over to their country. The problem is that their money wasn't accepted throughout the world. Instead, like true Russians, the Soviet Union traded vodka for Pepsi. This was all good until the late 1980s, when their contract was going to expire and vodka wouldn't cut it for payment. So instead they traded Pepsi, a fluffton of submarines and warships, for $3 billion worth of Pepsi. Sadly, instead of terrorizing the seas and shooting harpoons at their enemies, Pepsi decided to sell the fleet to a Swedish scrap metal company.